Everyone starts somewhere in the design world, and I definitely started somewhere. Hey y'all, welcome back to the channel. I'm Duran with DuranSupply.com, where I help you design smarter, not harder. We're gonna take a look at some of the first t-shirt designs that I ever did and watch the progression of my style over time. And I'm gonna tell you a little bit about each design and the year that I created it in. I think this is gonna be really cool because I had a very noticeable shift of styles as I went on in my design journey, all the way from 2018 until current day, 2024. So let's see just how much my work has improved over the last 6 years. Okay, we're starting off with probably my first t-shirt design ever, if I recall correctly. This was in 2018, obviously. I had been designing for a little bit before 2018. I was, like 15 years old at the time. Back then, I was doing Call of Duty and Minecraft, Twitter and YouTube headers. That's actually how I got started in design, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate. I'd actually go back to that era right now if I could, because that shit was something else. But yeah, literally the basis of like all my Photoshop knowledge was forged in those years in 2018 when I was a 15-year-old making COD and Minecraft, YouTube and Twitter headers for dirt cheap. Pretty crazy to think about. So around that time, I met a guy on the web, probably through Minecraft or something, who was just loaded, right? He paid me what felt like $1 million for some graphic work. I wish I could remember his name, so shout out to the mysterious rich man that I met in 2018. At the time, I charged like maybe $5 or $10 for a banner or a graphic, and this guy was paying me like 50. So yeah, what a guy. And he loved my work, so I was always working with him. And this was a shirt I did for his school. I think it was a private school called Millbrook or something, clearly for their Earth Week. So he just wanted me to incorporate an M into the Earth. Pretty simple stuff, but I actually took it upon myself to create a whole 3D render of the M incorporated onto an Earth. So I was pretty nasty at Cinema 4D for a 15-year-old. I was actually probably way better at 3D stuff when I was 15 than what I am now. I honestly forgot everything I knew about Cinema 4D. But anyway, he ended up wanting something a bit more simple. So I worked out these variations here, which just had the M carved into the Earth and sort of a vector style here, which I drew. Believe it or not, I did this in Photoshop. So this was supposed to be a vector artwork, and I just pen tooled all these things in Photoshop. I don't know why I did that. Actually, I do know why. Number one, I had cracked Photoshop. I did not have cracked Adobe Illustrator. And two, I just don't like Adobe Illustrator to this day. Either way, this is my first t-shirt design ever. You can see me learning contrast and type arrangements already. Pretty fun stuff. Let's move on to late 2018/early 2019. These are two shirts I did for the actual thing that got me really into designing t-shirts. My first clothing brand ever. It was called And So It Goes, which is a reference to a Mac Miller song. So this was actually a clothing brand I dedicated entirely to Mac Miller after his passing, because he was and has continued to be such an influential and cathartic artist for me. I've been bumping his Faces mixtape for close to 7 years now, and it hits just as hard as when I first heard it. The thing got me through some tough times, so I figured, I'd pay him back with this clothing line. And so I sold these t-shirts and donated all my proceeds to the Amy Winehouse Foundation. These are some of the first designs I did for that clothing brand. So here's Mac on a tee, and this one was inspired by Memento Mori, which is a concept that I learned in art class, and then he also had a song referencing it, so I thought it was very fitting to make a tee like that for the brand. And this one's obviously Mac on a tee with some design styling going on. Really simple stuff, but you can see me sort of getting a feel for composition on a t-shirt here, which is a lot different than a feel for composition on a canvas, which is what I was used to because I had went to art school at this time. If only I had Duran Supply mockups back then, right? Either way, these are just a few designs that I did for that brand, and I've been designing t-shirts pretty much ever since this. This is what really inspired me to start designing merch and t-shirts in general. I never really considered that an option, but after doing these t-shirts and trying to work out the ins and outs of this clothing brand, it showed me just how fun and interesting the t-shirt design game can be, and it was definitely a challenge that helped me progress a bit faster in my design journey. Okay, now we're going on to 2019 here. This is when I dropped the first t-shirt for my own clothing line called Duran, which is funny because I kept the lazy idea of just using my name as the name for the clothing brand all the way to this day. But anyway, this was a pretty massive shift in my style, I'd say, mostly because this is when I was getting a lot more into politics as the political landscape in America became pretty hyperactive nearing 2020. I was listening to a lot of Frank Zappa and just 60s hippie shit. I've even got some Frank Zappa referenced on this t-shirt here. So at this point, I was kind of going hard down the satirical route in terms of design, and you'll see more of that in a second. So this tee was sort of a joke based on the idea of nonconformity, or conforming to nonconformity, or being counterculture and alternative and edgy just for the sake of that title. It features some cutout old illustrations, and this is when I discovered the stamp filter in Photoshop, which was game changing for me. It also had some halftones here, which clearly became quite a big thing within my work, and this sort of warning label, which the concept of also became pretty big in my work around this time. Another one from 2018 here. As you can see, I'm going down that direction of satire like I just mentioned. So this time I was just kind of developing and figuring out the stuff I like to do, and one of those things clearly is making jokes or satirical stuff, which later on matured into some more pertinent political satire. You can also see me experimenting a bit more with composition and style here, and obviously going back to those halftones, which, I mean, you already know, that's my thing. Now let's go on to 2019, which is my second year designing t-shirts. So this is a tee I made in 2019. At the time, I was very proud of this, not only because it was a commission and I didn't get much of those, but also I was just starting to feel out my sort of style composition wise. I really liked framing graphics with these sort of sci-fi like containers, and I started getting more into that sort of acid graphics rave flyer look, which you can see in this tee as well from 2019, especially this one actually, which was a hit. I still love this one. I was also very inspired by the Grateful Dead and all the cool creative stuff around that band. So you can see there's a lot of hippie culture influence coming into my work at this point, and that's also sort of the root of all the political satire, which you can see here in this t-shirt I did also in 2019. This one's an absolute beauty, obviously making fun of Ronald Reagan for his involvement in the crack epidemic and the war on drugs. This was also using my stamp filter and grain method, which became a huge thing for me around this time and also led me down the path of dithering and that whole Xerox grain look that I still talk about and use to this day. Similar type of ordeal on this t-shirt down here, which was also in 2019, and this one as well. As you can see, I was having quite the fun time starting to composite images together, learning how to composite, and then filtering them with that Xerox grain look, something that is still in my back pocket. That eventually got me into bitmapping, which you can see here in this t-shirt from 2020. And 2020 is really where it all went down, man. Obviously, COVID happens. I'm stuck in my college dorm room for months on end. What else to do but design and get to know Photoshop really well. So this tee is also where I started going out of my comfort zone conceptually, and where I started to incorporate more sort of deep and psychedelic tropes within my artwork. This right here is actually the t-shirt I did right before that. This one's still a banger, man. So a pretty sudden shift in my styles, right? But either way, I actually did a whole tutorial on this design right here. So obviously I was getting pretty comfortable with Photoshop around this time, enough so to start teaching y'all. Here's another one from 2020, again utilizing that new bitmapping technique that I learned. Also did a whole tutorial on this design. It's all the way back on my channel if you want to check that out. You can see me getting really into more detailed compositions, more thought out concepts, and incorporating sci-fi elements into my work, which has become a huge staple for me. Everyone knows I'm a massive fan of Terminator. That's where so much of my inspiration comes from. You can see that reflected pretty clearly in my work, all the sci-fi elements and thematics. Now this is where a pretty big shift happened with this tee right here. Got real into the sci-fi look and started incorporating more of my 3D skill set into my merch design. So this was a render I did in Cinema 4D, and I turned it into this t-shirt right here. I also joined a Discord community of designers around this time called Eco, which actually inspired me to make this design in the first place. So shout out to Eco, shout out to Sauce Design. Being in a design community pretty much propelled me in my design journey tenfold. It's amazing what can happen when you talk to other designers about design. This is also where I learned about a really cool threshold technique that I still use to this day. It's pretty much the precursor to depth tone, aka thresholding different tonal levels of the image to get more detail in the shadows, the midtones, and the highlights. Pretty much the whole concept and process that depth tone, the product on my store, is based off of. And so around here is where my style really starts to solidify. We're going to check out a couple more designs from this era, and the rest is history. This was another design I did using a 3D render I made in Cinema 4D. Obvious, huge Terminator influence and big political message, which I write a lot about on my site. This is around the time when I started dropping clothes again through my clothing brand aptly named Duran, which as a reflection of me is deeply rooted in politics. And the last thing I want to do is understate just how much my interest in politics has influenced my design style over the years. My designs have been pretty political ever since the beginning. I'll put a few on screen here for you to see just as some more examples. And I would say most of my designs are rooted in my politics. However, the way I communicated that changed a lot over time. It started off with sort of pop art style satire, and that increasingly morphed into sort of a sci-fi, dystopian grunge feel to communicate how I feel about the world. I guess that's sort of a reflection of my political optimism as I grew older. So the sci-fi sort of stuff does look cool, but there's a lot of thought and depth behind it that may not immediately meet the eye. Terminator is actually a highly political movie too, but I'm not going to get into that right now. However, if you do want to go down this rabbit hole, I wrote a lot about these topics for my clothing brand and for all of you to read way back when I was doing more of this sort of style of work. You can check that out on duranstudios.com/welcome. I wrote some pretty unpolished essays on there if you'd like to check that out. Anyway, this design also incorporates that threshold technique that I mentioned earlier, which of course became huge in my process and eventually led to the creation of depth tone. Here are some designs from 2021, which is the year I wholeheartedly believe I found my style and really went super cathartic with my work. I haven't had a year that prolific since then. I also consider these two to be some of my best designs ever, and of course I have the hoodie for this and the t-shirt for this somewhere in my closet. Extremely proud of these, and this too, which I also dropped and have in my closet. So at this point I feel like I fully developed my taste in design and my style, and really flourished with that throughout the whole year of 2021. I really got deep into the cyber, sci-fi, grungy look, and that's really my domain, I'd say. I also got really into expressing my thoughts and emotions through my graphics, not only with the graphic content itself, but with poems that I would write and incorporate into the designs, which I'll put a few up on screen here for you to see. But yeah, this is from 2021, 3 years after I started designing merch and t-shirts and all that. If I go back to the years prior to this, you could see just how huge of a difference there is in development of my style, from obviously the first t-shirt I designed in 2018, where I just started feeling out designing t-shirts and actually design in general, versus 2020 to 2022, which is where I really found myself through design. So lastly, I just want to show y'all a side-by-side of my style from 2019-ish till now, 2024. This is pretty much just a comparison of my Instagram feed, but wow, it's really crazy to look at. So much of my life and just my outlook on it is reflected in my work, and you can see the maturity and just consciousness set in just by looking at my old versus my new work side by side. Everything I create is a reflection of me, so it's really cool to see just how I've evolved and navigated the tides of life through the manifestation of those emotions in my artwork. And that's a wrap. Thank you guys so much for watching. It may not seem like it, but this video has got some emotional weight for me, not only because we're going pretty introspective on my evolution as an artist and a person, but it's also a goodbye for me to a large chapter of my life. As I'm recording this, I'm about to leave my college town for good. I'm all graduated and I'm going to start life. I started making these videos in my college freshman dorm room. If you've been watching me from the jump, you've seen me go from that dorm room to the apartment I got the next year, which is a different apartment from this one. And then now this apartment, which I'm now leaving to go back home to Miami and set up camp over there. My life has changed so much since I started designing and since I started this channel, as well as my store, Duran Supply. Despite putting out all these tutorials and videos to teach you guys, I've always still just felt like a kid, which makes sense. I mean, I started this YouTube channel when I was 18 and I'm almost 22 now, and it just feels so crazy to be here. Doing this video brought me into a whole trip down memory lane, and it's pretty profound to see a perspective on my life through the manifestation of that in my artworks. So as the sun sets on this chapter of my life, I just want to give a huge thank you to everyone who supports me and everyone who's been watching since I was just a wide-eyed kid making tutorials in my college dorm room. Your support means everything to me. Thank you, and I'll see you in the next one. Peace out.